Okay, so I'm going to be going through hypoxia. Okay, now hypoxia is probably one of the biggest topics in first semester just because it's a huge topic. It has many different categories of hypoxia. Okay, we're going to go through each one, try and break it down. All right, you need to know there's 6 types with an extra one here, which is not technically a hypoxia, but you still need to know it. Hypoxic hypoxia, hemic circulatory is the toxic. Hyperoxic dysoxia, this one is the odd one out, but still know it anyway. Chronic and mixed. Hypoxic hypoxia is all about you intaking a reduced percentage of oxygen. Okay, so there's hypoxia in the air. There's hypoxia in the air, and so because there's hypoxia in the air, you're intaking less oxygen, so there's going to be hypoxia within you. Hemic, this is all about blood, especially having less oxygen carrying capacity. Circulatory, this is all about the blood as well, but this is about the quantity of blood. Histotoxic is all about the histo, the tissue. And toxic effects, which can damage the tissue. Hyperoxic, this is all about increase of oxygen. This increase of oxygen can cause certain effects, certain damaging effects on the tissue, i.e. dysoxia. Dysoxia we'll go through later, how this causes a reduction in ATP in regards to mitochondria. Chronic, so how does the body over a prolonged period of time deal with lower oxygen and the effects, and mixed. So mixed is 2 or more different types of hypoxia. Now, when we talk about hypoxic hypoxia, like I mentioned, it's all about the quantity of the amount of oxygen you're intaking. Okay. So you can have 2 types, endo and exo, endogenous, exogenous. Endogenous, just think about how. So endogenous is all about factors within you. Why are you intaking less oxygen percentage? And you could think of this as because there's a pathology with the diffusion, your ability to diffuse the oxygen into your blood. So smoking, all right, somewhat simple. Exogenous, Triple H, all right, and NHH. Triple H is a wrestler, but also Triple H is hypobaric hypoxic hypoxia. Okay, hypobaric meaning pressure related, hypo less pressure. When you think of barometer, all right, thinking about pressure. So where can you find less pressure? Mountains, all right, mountains. And next one, NHH, normobaric. This is normobaric, meaning normal pressure, normal baric. There's nothing wrong with the pressure. We're not on a mountain now. We still have hypoxic hypoxia. Why? If we look at the blue dots here, they represent oxygen. We have 2 blue dots out of a million different other gases. Do you think that will be sufficient for us? No, this oxygen is being diluted by all these other types. There's less partial pressure. This is normal baric. The pressure is fine. We're not on a mountain. But we still have hypoxic hypoxia due to the disbalance in the partial pressure. That's exogenous. All right, let's move on. Hemic hypoxia. Now this is all about, like I said, oxygen transport. Less oxygen transport. Why? 1, anemia. Makes sense. Less red blood cells, less oxygen being transported and binding to it. Second, carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, as you know, has a great affinity and a reduction in the dissociation rate. So less oxygen will less oxygen will bind, less oxygen will go to the tissues. Methahemoglobinemia. What happens here? There's a change in the hemoglobin from 2 to 3 plus, from ferrous to ferric. What does this cause? This would cause an inability of oxygen to bind, because oxygen likes 2 plus, it doesn't like 3 plus. How do you get this? Nitrate poisoning. Who is susceptible? Babies. What does it cause? Blue baby syndrome. Blue baby syndrome. That's why you don't give water to little babies, infants. Next, sulfur hemoglobin. If you want to know that, this basically causes irreversible impairment of the hemoglobin due to sulfur-containing things. So sulfur-containing drugs, maybe some sulfur-containing drugs, whatever they may be. I'm not too bothered. Circulatory hypoxia. This is all about the quantity. This is all about the blood supply. Blood supply can be local, general. What would happen if it's local? It would cause ischemia. What about general? It would cause congestion. Local ischemia. Okay? You won't find systemic ischemia. You would find local ischemia. Where would you find it? Normally in the coronary arteries. Yeah? So how can we get ischemia? Spasms. What do you think of when you say spasms? You should be thinking of Prince Metal. When you think of occlusions, what are you thinking of? You should be thinking of unstable angina, or you should be thinking of infarction. What's going to happen? Less oxygen to the tissues, less oxygen to the cells. This causes necrosis. Okay. What are the two organs which are heavily affected by ischemia? Can you think? There's two. It's heart and the brain. Alright? These two organs are heavily dependent because they require a lot of glucose. And because they're heavily active, they require oxygen, a lot of it. Next, general. Okay. Now with general, what do you think of? You think of congestion. Think of congestion, right? Think of chronic heart failure, especially right-sided, in which you will get that systemic pooling of blood. Okay. Mixed is just a combination between the two. So that's circulatory, including local and general. Okay. Now histotoxic is a bit confusing, but let's go through it step by step. Okay. Now, when we say histo, we mean tissue. Toxic, there's something going wrong with the tissues that's causing hypoxia. Think, when you say this, when you think of this, think of dysoxia. What did I say about dysoxia? It's related to the mitochondria, and especially reduction in ATP in some form, or there's some damage in the mitochondria. Something's going on in the mitochondria that causes us to have a abnormality in energy production. Mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. Alright, what's going on? Why is there toxicity that's causing hypoxia in the tissues? Cyanide. Think of cyanide. So when we think of the electron transport chain, okay, we think of electrons being passed down the chain. I mean, what a brilliant way, what a brilliant name to call this process, electron transport chain. So we are carrying our electrons down the chain, And what happens? Cyanide is binding with cytochrome oxidase, cytochrome 4. Originally, this electron was supposed to be accepted by oxygen and form water. Okay. However, there's an inhibition in cytochrome oxidase. What's going to happen now? There's going to be a buildup of electrons if we disrupt cytochrome oxidase. If we disrupt this, there's going to be a buildup of electrons. And what does that mean? If there's a buildup, less electrons will be passed down the chain. If less electrons are being passed down the chain, that means less hydrogen ions are being made for us to use in the ATP synthase. Okay? Basically, in a nutshell, if you block this process, you'll get less ATP. What did I say about dysoxia? Less ATP. There will be less ATP, or there will be something wrong with the mitochondria that causes less energy. So, now, you must have heard of this question. You must have heard of it before. What causes hypoxia without hypoxemia? I want you to think of two things. One, cyanide, we just mentioned, okay? Because the cyanide affects the tissues, so hypoxemia, there wouldn't be any hypoxemia. It doesn't affect the oxygen in the blood. Hypoxia is in the tissues. This damage is localized in the tissues. Cyanide, number one. Number two, anemia. Now, with anemia, how does this cause hypoxia but not hypoxemia? Okay. If we reduce our blood cells, we are going to have less oxygen overall within our blood. If we have less oxygen in our blood, the tissue is going to suffer, isn't it? Say this tissue requires 100 parts of oxygen, and I'm giving you 100 parts. But now you come to me and say, oh, sorry, I don't have all the cars, I don't have all the trucks needed. Okay? I only have this amount, 75% or 80%. I'm going to give you 80% worth of oxygen to give to your 80% worth of blood cells. 80% out of 80% here is still 1. It's like 100%, isn't it? So we don't have hypoxemia here. It's fully saturated. There's no hypoxemia here. I know, oh, you still have 80%. I know I have 80%. But the oxygen deliverance and the actual transport is same. There's saturation, there's full saturation. We don't get hypoxemia here. However, when you go to the dealership, when you go to the guy, okay, the shopkeeper, he asks for 100 parts. You've only got 80. There's a disbalance. There's hypoxia. He wants 100. You've only got 80. Over here, we had 80 out of 80. We got fully saturation. Here, we got 100. Sorry, we have 80 over 100. 80 over 100. 100 is needed. So this is what I mean by hypoxemia. You don't have hypoxemia, but you have hypoxia. Okay? So that's that. Now, that's not the only thing as well. There's some other things that can cause hypoxia, but not hypoxemia. So you may remember from biochemistry from last year. So we've already mentioned cyanide, okay? Oligomycin and T3, T4, these are oxidative phosphorylator uncouplers. They prevent ATP synthesizing new ATP. So there's a disruption in that process. T3 and T4 and oligomycin causes this disruption. Next, calcium overload. I'm not going to go into the details, but basically think of this causing mitochondrial apoptosis. Here's a glass of milk, calcium. All right. Is it finally? No, we got some more. All right, hyperoxic dysauxia. So this is not a type of hypoxia, but it's something you need to know. Hyperoxic dysauxia. We have an increase in oxygen in our blood. All right, increased partial pressure. Why? One thing that comes to mind is deep sea divers. They have these pure oxygen tanks, so they can have a high concentration in these oxygen tanks. It can lead to oxygen poisoning and different sort of things, but basically what you need to know here, this is what you need to know. Oxygen radicals can form, and this can damage the retina. It can damage the central nervous system and the pneumocyte type 2. Type 2 is responsible for surfactant. Alright, retina, CNS, lungs. Next, chronic hypoxia. How does the body deal with this over time? There's 4 stages you need to know. Saturation stage. This is basically the body's initial compensation, you can say, of a low oxygen amount. Alright? So the body gets used to having low oxygen. There's not necessarily some damage right now, but the body's just compensating via just being happy with a less amount of oxygen. Now, the second stage is adaptation. Adaptation here is the body is now in the, let's say, late to end stages of compensation. It's trying its best to keep up its bodily functions with a less amount of oxygen. So it's trying now to increase the oxygen supply so it can keep up with metabolic demands. This can cause wear and tear and damage. Okay? Wear and tear, damage to the tissues and etc. Hypoaerobiosis, aka dysoxia, hypoaerobiosis. You can use this interchangeably. What can you remember from this word, dysoxia? Remember, I said it's something to do with the mitochondria and something to do with ATP. Okay? Here is just flat out uncompensated, because these two were compensated in some form of another, and this one now is uncompensated. The body's had enough, it's given up. What's going to happen? Less ATP is being made. Dysoxia. I want you to always think of ATP and mitochondria when I say dysoxia. Finally, destruction. Destruction, you can just think of like necrosis. Things like necrosis. Now, how does the cell react? We're going on a microscopic scale, and then we're going to build up to the macroscopic. How does cell react? With the mitochondria, it becomes more permeable. Permeability can in some form or another be related to apoptosis. You can think of this, how I was saying before about calcium. calcium overload, and yeah, dysoxia. There's dysoxia. Cell cytosol, what's going to happen? It's going to become more acidotic. Why? Because we are because we now have less ATP being made. Okay, we need alternative forms of quick energy. So just think of anaerobic respiration, i.e. lactic acid. There's more lactic acid or more lactate being made. And this kind of goes back to the parameters, which I'm not going to mention, but there's basically 4 parameters of hypoxia. 4 parameters of hypoxia. It goes something like inadequacy, intake, inadequacy, intake. Let me just have a look. Inadequacy and adequacy. That's what it is. No, it isn't. It's intensity. Adequacy. I know it begins with an E. What is it? Economy and effectiveness. Okay, economy and effectiveness. Okay, and so this, where was I mentioning it? This lactic acid buildup goes into adequacy. Okay, I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, that's that. And lastly, 2 things. There could be nuclear damage, causing less polymerase being made, and lysosomal damage, causing spillage, and obviously with the hydrolytic enzymes causing collateral damage, necrosis of adjacent structures. Next, let's go to mixed. Mixed is just basically when you have multiple hypoxias occurring. So with carbon monoxide, this on the top of my head is like, I don't know, this is like hemic hypoxia, and what else? This is like not hypoxic, not histotoxic. Let's have a look. What could it be? It might be chronic as well. Histotoxic is not really. Yeah, it might be histotoxic as well. But yeah, let's just say chronic as well. And yeah, ARDS, that's just basically a complete shutdown of oxygen ventilation coming in. So that could be hemic, that could be histotoxic. So yeah, mix is just like a combination. These may not be right, I'm just thinking at the top of my head. Alright, lastly, macroscopic scale now. On an organismal level, how can the body adapt? or how does the body react? Because we've seen how cells react. Now let's see how the body reacts. Lungs. What can the lungs do? Okay. So lungs can basically increase, well, they can do certain things actually. They can do shunting of blood. So this is related to a VQ mismatch. So if some alveoli were damaged, the lungs can shunt blood to working alveoli instead of damaged alveoli. They can shift it to working alveoli. So then we can have the normal supply or a normal VQ balance. Okay, so this is seen in emphysema. And obviously lungs can do, tachypnea, increasing your breathing so that you can intake more oxygen. And with the heart can increase the cardiac output to keep up with oxygen demands. Kidneys can secrete EPO. Yeah. And with cells, the cells of tissues, what do we have in a muscle that stores oxygen? Myoglobin. So maybe we could increase myoglobin so we can increase storage amounts of oxygen. So kidneys with EPO, heart, increased cardiac output, lungs, shunting, or tachypnea. And yeah, I'm just thinking if I missed anything in lungs. No, I don't think. Well, I might have, I don't know, but I have completely blown your brains apart with all this information, so I'm just going to keep it there. Okay, so that has been hypoxia. It hasn't been everything. There are some things I missed out, like the 4 parameters of hypoxia. Okay, and also there's acid-base kind of mechanisms that go with hypoxia, so that's another thing. But this covers hypoxia, the core principles, the different types. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. Hope you enjoyed. Hope it made sense.